Yo, Christopher, what's up?
Hey, what's up, man?
Get the
How could this happen? How could this happen?
Okay, so in this video, I'm going to be talking about Redshirts by John Scalzi. On the surface, it's a Star Trek parody, but the plot is pretty wild. If you grew up watching Star Trek, you'll recognize a lot of the tropes that this book makes fun of. Like, the title is a reference to the fact that if you're a minor character and you're wearing a red shirt, then you're probably going to die that episode.
You exist, and then you cease to exist.
There's lots of fun sci-fi stuff that pops up in this book, like aliens, spaceships, and time travel, but the main thing I want to focus on in this video is the deeper meaning behind the story. Before I get into that, fair warning that there's going to be major spoilers ahead in this video. In his video, What Writers Should Learn from The Lord of the Rings, Just Right asks,
what's the difference between a story and a plot?
He defines the difference like this.
Put simply, the plot is just all the stuff that happens. The story is what that stuff is actually about.
Plot is the external events of the work, what physically happens. Story is the internal meaning of those events, emotional journeys, character arcs, essentially personal growth of the characters. The conflict of a plot usually is something external, like overcoming a bad guy, and the conflict of a story is usually internal to the characters, like overcoming a flaw. In a good work of fiction, the two work together. By defeating the external antagonist, the characters also overcome their internal conflict, and thus learn something meaningful about themselves through the story. Redshirts by John Scalzi is a book which perfectly demonstrates the difference between story and plot. Before I get into my discussion, let's do a quick rundown of what Redshirts is about, from both a plot and story perspective. At the plot level, Redshirts is about a crew aboard a futuristic starship who begin to suspect that something strange is going on, like how people on their away teams keep dying in increasingly ridiculous ways. Eventually, they uncover the truth. Their reality is actually part of a fictional TV show. And what's worse, it's not even a good show. It's a cheesy Star Trek knockoff, where every episode, characters die in lazy Monster of the Week plotlines. The book is hilarious because the characters are constantly breaking the fourth wall to make fun of how ridiculous and lazy the writing on the TV show is. And that's where Nick Weinstein comes in. Nick is the head writer on the show. He's going to be very important at the story level, but for now let's stick to the plot. Desperate to escape their TV show reality, the characters hatch a plan, travel back in time and confront Nick, the writer, along with the show's creator, Charles Paulson, to get them to cancel the show. They eventually strike a deal with Paulson. He will end the show if they use the show's fictional medical tech to save his dying son. At the end of the book, the characters return to their time and do save Paulson's son. Paulson holds up his end of the bargain and does end the show, allowing the crew to live out the rest of their lives on their own outside of the show's influence. Okay, so that's the plot. If you just look at Redshirts from the plot level, it's a fun story about space, making fun of Star Trek, and characters breaking out of a fictional reality. But at the story level, something deeper is going on. Remember Nick from earlier, the head writer of the show? In the plot, he seemed like just a minor character. But at the story level, I would argue that he's actually the main character. Throughout the book, Nick writes lazy, derivative, sci-fi slop. His characters are constantly making fun of how stupid his writing is. For example, here's a conversation between Nick and one of his characters, Finn. Finn, you're a decent enough writer, Nick, but you're lazy. Nick, come on, that's not fair. You're dead because it's an action show. People die in action shows. It's one of the reasons it's called an action show. Finn says, how did you die? Redshirt number 1, ice shark. Finn, seriously, an ice shark? What's even the biology on that? Anyone else randomly eaten by space animals? Pornathic crabs, the great badger of Tau Ceti, Borgovian landworms. This is typical of Nick's writing. At the story level, this is Nick's main struggle. He knows he's a lazy writer, but he can't admit it even to himself. His central conflict is learning to overcome his laziness and to actually create meaningful art. So what is Redshirts really about at the story level? Well, my interpretation is this. John Scalzi, the author of Redshirts, hates bad writing. And he hates lazy writers especially, who don't live up to their potential. At its most basic level, this is what Redshirts is about. It's John Scalzi's advice to other writers, telling them that they need to take the craft seriously. It's Scalzi saying, stop being lazy and do better.
Well then get your shit together! Get it all together and put it in a backpack! All your shit so it's together! And if you gotta take it somewhere, you know? Take it to the store and sell it! Or put it in a museum, I don't care what you do! You just gotta get it together! Get your together!
The 3 levels of Redshirts. Redshirts is multi-layered. The plot operates on 2 levels. On one level, the characters all exist inside of a TV show. On another, they exist in their own real world, which is later revealed to also be inside of a book. I know it's kind of confusing, it's supposed to be stupid. But then there's a 3rd level, the story. On this level, I would argue that the events of the plot are actually all happening inside of Nick's mind. What we read is really an extended metaphor for Nick's internal, story-level conflict. So what is this conflict? In a word, denial. Like I said earlier, Nick is lazy, and as a result, his writing is pretty bad. But that's not his biggest problem. His biggest problem is that he won't admit that he has a problem. Whenever someone tells him his writing is bad, he makes excuse after excuse. He blames the genre, saying it's just a sci-fi show. He says it's network TV, not Shakespeare. He says he's on a tight deadline. He even blames the show's other writers, even though he's the head writer and has the final say. Until he learns to accept his flaws as a writer, he'll never grow, and he'll never write anything truly good. Read this way, Redshirts is a story about growing by learning to recognize your own flaws. If you aren't familiar with how Redshirts is structured, it's broken out into 2 sections, a main narrative, where all of the plot I've just described happens, and 3 ending codas. The codas are not necessary from a plot perspective. Everything in the main plot is wrapped up nicely in the main narrative. That's why some people don't like the codas. They consider them unnecessary add-ons.
Are you sure that this is completely necessary?
Necessary? Is it necessary for me to drink my own urine?
Probably not.
No, but I do it anyway because it's sterile and I like the taste.
Okay.
And if you're only thinking about plot while reading Redshirts, then this view makes sense. But from a story perspective, the codas are the meat of the book. This is because the story is never resolved in the main narrative. It's only in the codas where Nick finally gets his resolution. Coda 1 opens with Nick suffering from writer's block. On the surface, the cause of his writer's block is his fear of killing more characters, but this is only a symptom. The true cause is that he never really resolved his conflict from the main narrative. Deep down, he knows all of his excuses are BS, but he's not ready to admit, even to himself, that he's a bad or lazy writer. So his subconscious gives him an out. He can't write badly if he can't write at all. What he's really afraid of isn't killing more characters, it's writing something new and then discovering that it sucks. He eventually talks to another writer, Denise Hogan, who tells him the hard truth. He's not trying hard enough as a writer, and this is why his writing is bad. Nick gets defensive again and storms off, still unwilling to admit that he is the problem. But that night, something happens. He has a dream in which he meets all of the characters he's killed. They tell him they're angry, but not because they're dead. It's because their deaths were stupid and meaningless. Poorly written. They tell him that Denise Hogan was right, that his characters deserve better writing so that they can have meaning in their deaths. This dream is the true climax of the story. It marks the moment that Nick finally drops all of his excuses and admits the truth. He is the one to blame for his bad writing. Not the network, not the genre, just him. It's the cathartic moment of transformation that we've been waiting for the whole book. And the story's resolution comes immediately after this climax. As soon as Nick wakes up, his writer's block is cured. He says, "And then I wrote 30 pages of the best goddamn script I've ever written." So while the plot wraps up in the main narrative, Coda 1 is the story's true ending. I'd like to end this with a quick discussion of why this book is so captivating. In short, it's because the conflict is so relatable. We've all been there, stubbornly refusing to acknowledge our flaws. Nick embodies all of us. Nick doesn't have much trouble accepting that his writing is bad, but he's extremely stubborn about why it's bad, making excuse after excuse for why it's everyone's fault but his. Excuses are your ego's way of protecting its self-image. If you can blame your failure on something external to yourself, then you can still see yourself as fundamentally competent and good. But If you let go of your excuses, then, in some sense, you have to assume the identity of failure. This is really hard for most people to do. If you do everything you can to succeed and still fail, then the failure is on you. This is the scariest thing about trying. Nick initially embodies the safe response to this problem. Don't try. As long as you're not trying to write anything actually good or meaningful, then you can't fail. But by the end of Nick's character arc, he realizes that he needs to try. This is what makes Redshirts such a great bit of commentary. It seems very hard on writers at times, but in the end, its message is fundamentally one of hope. Try to do better, and you might get rewarded. Redshirts may be disguised as just a satire of bad sci-fi, but it's really the story about becoming a better version of yourself, especially when that's difficult. Okay, so to recap, on the surface, Redshirts is a fun Star Trek parody about characters escaping a TV show. But at the core, I think it's a story about escaping your own bad habits, with strong themes about self-deception, fear of failure, and creative accountability. For such a short, lighthearted book, it packs a big punch, and as a result, it's one of my favorite things I've read this year. These are just my thoughts and analysis, but if you've also read Redshirts, I'd love to know what you think. Let me know in the comments.